Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Colin Watt and Amy Canavan. Welcome to the show. This is the Axon Bulletin. Plenty to discuss. It's match day, Colin. Now, over the last week or so, it's been difficult to talk about football because other stories have dominated the headlines. And obviously, we are looking ahead to Neil Lennon's first game back in the dugout tonight. Are we able just to get back to what we are meant to be good at? Is this going to result in a managerial change that has been rumoured? What's your thoughts on tonight's game, or is it just yet another game for Celtic to hopefully maintain the deficit? Not cut it down, but maintain the deficit in terms of this game in hand, this 3 games in hand that people are saying, well, there's 9 points. Well, let's see. Let's see tonight. It's going to be a tough one.
It's been a long time since we've actually won away at Livingston, and looking at the pictures that have came out from the stadium this evening, they might be better at building snowmen and having a snow fight than playing football on that park. Apparently the game's going to go ahead. It wouldn't surprise me if it didn't go ahead, considering that Livingston have had games called off already over the last couple of weeks because of that pitch. I think it was waterlogged last week. I don't know how you can get a waterlogged plastic pitch. This one's obviously looks as if Elsa from Frozen's just been there and spread all the snow everywhere. It's certainly something. Do you know what? It's something to look forward to that is actually talking about football. It's not talking about politics. It's not talking about things that are happening off the park. It's not talking about trips to Dubai. It's actually talking about the 90 minutes on the park. It's about what formation will we play, what tactics will we play, how can we get a win at a ground that we've not won at for years, and it's actually getting back onto that subject instead of things that are kind of out with our control.
The thing with that, Colin, what I would say there is the only reason that we were still talking about that subject is because of the aftermath, and part of that aftermath was, it was self-inflicted. It was the press conference that Neil Lennon came out and gave, and then the aftermath of that as well, which is still rumbling on. So when you're doing a daily bulletin, if there's a development on what's happened in Dubai, if there's a development on what's happened with the press conference, we will speak about it. We will also speak about the game. But this is the thing, and I think this is one of the frustrations. Amy, I'll ask yourself if you agree with this. Peter Lowell came out and he was widely criticised for his apology on Celtic TV because of what came after the apology, and he was criticised. But I think there was a sense that at least this has happened, at least an apology has been made. Can we possibly start rebuilding from there? And I think the frustration for me was that the press conference that Neil Lennon gave set us back quite a distance. Then you're having to wait on responses from some of the clubs that he called out, St Johnstone and Hamilton. And it's just a matter of time, I'm thinking, before an even bigger authority comes back and hits back at Celtic. So, yeah, it would be great to have that behind us. Amy, do you think that this is going to rumble on even further? There are wider ranging consequences of the interview that Neil Lennon gave the other day.
I really do. I just think it seems to be the gift that keeps on giving right now. Like you say, it's one of those ones that I think we all were thinking, we're a little bit more hopeful that Lawwell comes out, whatever apology, if you want to call it an apology, he addresses the matter no matter what. And then Lennon yesterday, it was just all a bit contradictory. It was like he wanted and needed to get his tuppence worth in. And I understand he wanted to back his players and back his staff, back himself, back his decisions. But it just all seemed, like I say, a little bit contradictory, and just, like you say, bringing us right back into the debacle that we sort of had hoped that we'd moved on from. Like you say, sort of hoping we could come in today just to focus on Livingston if the game goes ahead. I'm not too far from Livingston, and if Livingston was called off last week, if I'm looking out my window right now, I'm not seeing any chance of the game going ahead tonight, especially with the forecast as well. Like you say, a plastic pitch or all-weather pitch can get called off waterlogged. You've seen the pictures today. It's thick snow out there. But yeah, I don't know. He just looked like a man lost, didn't he? And there was so much emotion there. There really was. You can't doubt that. Was it the right emotions though? I don't know. It just really does seem a lost man out there.
I've seen a lot of talk about a pile-on. I've seen a lot of talk about everybody, diving on this narrative that the press have in relation to kicking Lennon when he's down. But what Neil Lennon should have done is, avoided giving him as much ammunition, Colin. I mean, he gave them a lot of ammunition, We've already spoken all week about the confrontational nature of that. How to win friends and influence people. That is the opposite. Going out there and having pot shots at everybody, all and sundry. And obviously a big part of that was a discussion this week. We wanted to get back to the football. There are other matters that we have to deal with, Colin, because during the press conference, Neil Lennon and the rest of us found out that another player had tested positive for coronavirus. It's not been confirmed yet. There's been a few names flying around, some eagle-eyed amongst us noticed that Edouard and Cham were not at the most recent training session footage that was released. We're going to have another couple of players missing tonight, Colin, but sticking with the football, with that in mind, could you give us a predicted lineup if indeed it is Eddie and Cham who are going to be missing tonight?
Yeah, so if we go on the basis that is the players, and obviously we can't confirm that it's just what people have seen looking at the training videos. I would think that we would go with Barkas in goal. I think that is Lennon's chosen goalkeeper out of the three options that he has there. You've seen that when he brought him back in for the Rangers game. I think that's the person he wants to go with. Looking at the back sort of four, we'll see the return of Christopher Julian, hopefully, if he's fit.
Ayer.
Also, Ayer as well.
Sorry, Julian's out.
Julian's out. Apologies, yeah, Julian is out. So we'll see the return of Christopher Ayer. Who will he be partnered alongside? I wouldn't want him to be partnered alongside Near Beaton. I don't think it's a right fit for Beaton to be playing in there. I would say that Ayer should be partnered alongside Shane Duffy or Stephen Welsh. If I was picking the team, I would pick Stephen Welsh, but I think he'll go with Shane Duffy. I think Taylor might come back in at left back. I know that he didn't play the kind of couple of games there when everyone else is isolating, but I think he is the man to play left back tonight. Frimpong will probably play right back, and we'll go back to the diamond formation in the middle of the midfield with Sorrow, Turnbull, McGregor, and probably Christie. And then I'd imagine up front, if Eddie is the man that is missing, I would expect Lee Griffiths to start, and then it's between Patrick Klimala and Albion Ayeti to partner him. I think he might go with Ayeti.
Interesting. I mean, one of the big things obviously has been the return of Ayer. He walks right into that team, doesn't he? But who's he going to be partnered alongside? There's so many questions all around that park. We had already spoken about, when Welsh came in the first time round, Colin, and he basically just disappeared from the first team. Having given a decent enough account of himself, he just disappeared. And, the same thing's going to happen, and people mock and cringe and throw things at the TV screen when you see it. But Anthony Ralston played pretty well, I thought, against Livingston, and he's just probably going to disappear again.
It was a good ball
terms of a right back.
Sorry, I was going to say it was a good ball across for Okoflex. Unlucky not to put that in the back of the net. You were screaming on a proper striker to be there to put it in.
The big thing as well, it was when I suggested that, Kevin said, he's not the answer. I'm not saying he's the answer. What I'm trying to say is, if you're going to go, probably for the same reasons that you're bringing Taylor back in at left back, Colin, to play a flat back four, Frimpong for me, and I've said it all season, I don't regard him as a right back. But the only right backs we've got is Ilhamid and Ralston, and based on form, Ralston gets dropped. What does that say to him? Welsh coming back in would be your choice, but you reckon Neil Lennon will go for Shane Duffy.
Yes.
What's your thoughts, Amy, on that lineup and some of the probables, some of the kind of dilemmas that you might face? Obviously, if Eddie's out, who do you partner with Griffiths, for example?
Yeah, that's a dilemma in itself. Obviously, it does really depend on who is out. Again, the Welsh one is a dilemma. Getting dropped at the weekend, I'm still trying to get my head around that. Really don't understand that one. And then the other dilemma is the pitch itself. That is the biggest factor when you're playing Livingston. Who can play on plastic? Who's great on plastic? Who's not great on plastic? Obviously, Chris Ayer's going to walk right back into the side, and you hope that. Again, he's not the biggest fan of plastic. Shane Duffy, no idea. I wouldn't like him on plastic, to be honest with you. So yeah, I would go with Welsh, but Lennon should have been. I don't know if Lennon or Strachan, how joint the decision was the other day for the team against Livingston the first time round. But you would have this game in mind if it goes ahead. You would have it in mind, so you would play Welsh for continuity because you'd be thinking, right, Duffy can't play on plastic or whatever. I don't know. There just seems to be, like you say, there's a whole lot of questions about tonight. Don't oppose Colin's team. I'd prefer Welsh in as well. Again, Christie on plastic, he's not had the greatest record at Livingston either, with sending off and whatnot. Again, then do you revert to just having the one up top if it's Eddie that's out? Will he want to go Griffiths and Ayeti? Does he have that confidence in Ayeti or Klimala? So I don't know. There's a lot of questions to be asked tonight if the game goes ahead. I know I keep saying that, but I really don't know. I'd stick with Colin's team. I'd like to see Taylor in. I'd probably have Frimpong in as well. Again, I know Ralston was probably the best player at the weekend, but I just think he'll go Frimpong. I really do, because why play the best player 2 games in a row? Why do that? It's too obvious.
Now, I think the wider question would be that there was 2 games there where obviously we've had to bring in a lot of youngsters, and we spoke about the wider squad. Everybody was on the bench. 10 players under the age of 22 made an appearance, and some of those players are established first teamers now, the likes of Sorrow and Turnbull, and indeed, we would be hopeful to bring in another one in Edouard, but it sounds as though he might be one of the casualties. When you look at the players that came in, and we've discussed who made a good impact, who do you think might be, there might be some longevity in keeping them in there. It's interesting that neither of you think that any of the guys are going to retain their jerseys tonight. So Conor Hazard, yes, he was criticised against Hibs for flapping in much the same fashion that he did against Hearts in the final, to lose that late goal. He gets a clean sheet the following game, you're back out, Barkas is back in. And by the way, I think that's a certainty. I think Lenny will definitely do it. Will Welsh partner Ayer? I probably think he deserves it, but I don't think he will. I think he will be dropped, and I think Duffy will keep his jersey as he played against Livy the other week. And by the way, I think it was one of the worst performances I've seen from Duffy against Livingston at home. I thought he was dreadful. I'm going to be honest here, and there's no hiding it. Somebody might say, well, get behind the team or support. You've got to look at the guys who are not performing, and I don't think Duffy covered himself in glory. But one of the points you did make there, and also I also think I would be very surprised if Frimpong didn't start. I would be very, very surprised if Ralston did. So, I agree with that. I don't think Taylor will come back in, Colin. I think he'll stick with Laxalt. And up top, I think he'll go for one. I think he'll play Griffiths. And he'll make room for Tommy Rogic in that side, because, I was very unimpressed with Rogic over the 2 games. He's one of the guys that you're looking for with a bit of experience to try and assist and talk and shepherd the young guys through the games. I don't think Rogic did any of that over the 2 games. And what I find quite interesting as well is, remember we had that discussion, Colin, because you and I have various discussions about Ryan Christie and his effectiveness at Celtic. And I said some time ago that Ryan Christie wasn't on a big wage at Celtic. Can you remember the conversation? Mm-hmm. And I did actually allude to the fact that he was on less than 10 grand a week, and people said no chance. That's not the case. I found it interesting when the list of players' wages came out. I don't agree with it. I don't think it should have been published. I might be criticised for saying that because I said that Christie was under 10 grand. But I found that the disparity between the likes of Christie compared to Tom Rogic, I found that alarming. Because you've got Tom Rogic, who's one of the best paid players at Celtic, barely playing, and even when he does, sometimes he doesn't fancy it. Yeah, we see his twinkle toes from time to time, but is that enough? I don't think so. And then you see the kind of wages that the likes of Christie's on. I mean, Christie's on slightly more than Anthony Ralston, and he surely should have been given a better deal. So when a player like Christie is criticised for apparently wishing to leave the club, I mean, he's never came out and said that, I don't think. I think his dad's maybe alluded to it. You've got to look at the whole set of circumstances, Colin. The other issue I had with the list is that we're shelling out over 60 grand a week on 3 guys that are in on loan, only one of whom, Laxalt, is playing. So what was your thoughts when those figures came out, and particularly looking at the likes of Rogic, big wages, not really earning them, I don't think. Duffy, massive wages. El Yunusi, huge wages. And then you look at Christie, $8,000 a week. What was your thoughts when that came out, Colin? And should we really review our process of bringing in loan deals when that kind of money could bring in a top-class manager? 60 odd grand a week.
When you look at the loan deals, obviously that's a reflection on the wages that they're on at other teams, especially the likes of Shane Duffy and Mohamed El Enoussi. When you look at it, these guys are probably on £50,000, £60,000 down south quite easily, and Celtic's only having to pay half of that. And that's probably about the level that you would have to pay for a loan deal. So the fact that they're on £20,000 a week, that's what Celtic's paying. They're getting paid that again by their own club and as part of the loan deal. So I don't really look too much into that. It could be spent better, but you're hoping that bringing the players in of that calibre, you're expecting them to perform, and we've really not seen that this season. So it's a sort of catch-22 situation. It's the kind of wages you need to pay to attract those players, but if they're not performing for you, then you would think that by the time it gets to January, you'd be looking to kind of cancel those loan deals. And we've seen the discussion on that about Shane Duffy already. I think the player gets paid what they try and ask for from the club. And that's probably why Ryan Christie's letting his deal run down. I think he's only got something like 18 months left on his deal. If he was really interested in staying at the club, you would think the discussions would be ongoing and he would be looking to bump himself up. I think he's on the same wage as Jack Hendry, which says a lot. I think he's on something like £8,000 a week as well. So it's a catch-22 situation, put it that way. And what it does suggest to me is there's £60,000 worth of wages that if we were to put that back into our budget, could we then go and strengthen in January? Could we then go and strengthen the management team? We're only about, 10 days away from the window closing, and it doesn't look as if we're going to have anyone coming in at this rate. Is
it not interesting, Colin, that throughout the month of January we've barely spoken about transfers on this podcast, and we go out every day? I know. Now, I take your point, and there was also a transfer window. I'll come to you in a moment, Amy, and ask you your thoughts on this. We did it before. Remember, Burke, Weah and Toljan came in, 3 players, and like you say, Colin, on massive wages elsewhere, massive wages. And what's happening is they're not taking a wage cut. Obviously, we're paying a percentage of their wages. I get that. But they would have probably been on similar wages to the 3 that I've mentioned this season. That is an outlay of £3.25 million a year. And I just think that whole setup is counterproductive. Now, there's 2 things I would say to that. Imagine getting a manager in for a £3 million salary a year. What level of manager would you get in at that level? A very, very good one. But also, what does it do to the other players, like those at the same kind of level as Ryan Christie? So Jack Hendry's away on loan, and he was on the fringes of the team before he went on loan. Ralston's played 1 game in 18 months, so these guys are lesser paid players in the great scheme of things. Klamala's come in, I think, at £4,500 a week. If he proves himself, I'm sure that would be looked at. But a guy like Christie, I mean, what does it do to the harmony within a dressing room? When Duffy is tweeting out, Celtic pay all my wages, yet, Christie's getting £8,000. I just don't think it's conducive to a happy dressing room because, let's be honest, footballers are certainly not robots, and everybody knows what everybody's getting paid. You know what I mean? It's not always sent around in a WhatsApp because the cleaners dug your wage slip out of a garage somewhere, as we've seen with Raheem Sterling. But I just think it's a mismanagement of our funds. Now, would we be talking about this if we were 21 points ahead in the league? Probably not. And I keep saying that. Where we are focusing on a lot of the things that we've done for a long time. Like I say, Toljan, Burke and Weah came in before, was probably on about £60,000 combined a week. We didn't question it because we won the league that season. We won a treble. You know what I mean? Amy, what's your thoughts on that? And, shouldn't we have made more efforts to tie down Colin's favourite player, Ryan Christie, earlier than now?
I'll be honest, I never heard about the wages. I'm totally taken aback by that Ryan Christie's only on £8,000 a week. In the last few years he's been tipped up if he's up for Scotland Player of the Year, and all these sort of things. Like, he's been running ragged in the league. This season's probably his worst out in the last 3 or 4, and that's saying something, considering that he's been probably one of Celtic's better players in the first half of that season there. I'm completely taken aback by that. Like you say, 60 grand combined on the 3 loan players. Look at the calibre of manager you could be bringing in. Or even if you don't want to talk about a manager, because I know people don't like talking about it when Lennon's still in the job, look at the different standards of players you could still be bringing in. Like you say, you've got Laxalot at least starting, but Elyounoussi's off the boil and Duffy's Duffy. It's crazy. I really can't fathom. I don't know. Thank God I'm not in charge of the wages, put it that way.
That brings to mind, Amy, remember, certain Celtic players make their way into common parlance. So if you're having a Reggie blinker, or if you're having a Reggie, it means you're having a stinker. You've just made your own one up. You're having a Duffy. If you're if you're having a bad game at the back, you're having a Duffy. And Celtic, more than anything, have certainly Hibsed it. So we need a new saying for that this season. But it is one of these things whereby you've said there we don't want to talk about managers because Lenny's still in a job. I think we've got to talk about managers, and I think the developments this week has shown more than at any other point that there really is a real fragmentation in amongst the club. Now, I was feeling it before between the supporters, because obviously the minute you criticise Celtic or Neil Lennon, Colin, there's a real feeling that you're almost like letting the club down, But then the counter argument to that is that if you allow it to go as is, what is the result going to be? So if fans are looking for change and they do it in different ways, be that protests or banners outside the stadium, or they discuss it and debate it on social media or on a podcast, I think what's true is everybody wants the best for the club. What I don't like to see is fellow Celtic fans falling out about it. It's going to happen. It happened the last time there was some kind of uprising at Celtic, way back when. So when you're looking at the way that this has been dealt with since, Colin, I'm going to come and ask you this question, because again, it does involve Ryan Christie. So one of the things that Neil Lennon stated during his press conference was, when speaking to Charles Patterson, I'm not going to give my players, you're not going to get access to my players. And what he meant was Sky Sports would not get access to his players until he got an apology from Andy Walker. Now, I don't know if he's had an apology from Andy Walker, but Ryan Christie has since given an interview to Sky Sports. So I'm guessing there's contractual obligations there. Or could it be that the message that Neil Lennon was delivering at that stage wasn't the club's message? And that's a concern. Because obviously we know that there was contradictions throughout the interview that he gave, Colin. What's your thoughts on these contradictions, on the fragmentation within the club?
I mean, I think it was well put by Kieran Devlin of the Athletic this week. He posted an article which discussed this press conference. And he actually discussed that the board were caught off guard by what Neil Lennon came out and said. It wasn't the agenda that the board have been trying to set this season, and it wasn't the agenda which met the kind of message that Peter Lawwell tried to give off in his kind of forced interview, if you want to call it that, earlier in the week. So I think it's one person not telling the other person what to do at the minute. There's definitely a disjoint, not just between the fans and the club, but also between the management team and the boardroom as well. And it really does surprise me that we're kind of getting this far into the season and we've not heard anything concrete that suggests that Neil Lennon is under threat for his job. I know we speak about it on here, and all the other podcasts do the same, but anything that's come out of Celtic this season's always been that we're fully behind the manager. And then when you see that and you see the kind of disconnect between the two of them, you just wonder what the relationship is really like. I don't really know what's going to happen. I have a feeling that even if Celtic were to go and lose this game tonight, which I really hope we don't, I really want us to go on and win, because it's now been 3 games that we've not won. I want us to go and win tonight, but even if we don't, I still think we'd wake up tomorrow morning and Neil Lennon would still be in charge. It was a bit of a scattergun approach from the interview, and a lot of people said he was going down swinging. I don't even know if it was that. I think he wanted to try and get as many fans back behind him as possible. And you've seen that on social media. You speak about the fallout between fans. Fans are either on the side of Neil Lennon after that interview, or they think that the interview was completely wrong and a disgrace. But you do see that divide. And Lennon has managed to get some people back on his side from that interview. A lot of people even in this chat are saying well done to Neil Lennon for the points that he came out with. So the Celtic support are as divided as they have been at any point this season. And it's a kind of sorry state of affairs that we find ourselves in.
When you look at that, Colin, and we could discuss obviously the PR angle of it as well, which I'm sure will come into the chat. When you look at it though, Neil Lennon wasn't delivering Celtic's message. So is that because he decided to deliver his message? And if so, the club, looking at that, especially with the fallout in terms of Hamilton, St Johnstone coming out and saying, well, actually, I refute what you've said there. If the Scottish Government come out strongly and refute it, and then you've got three elements of that outburst from Neil Lennon being refuted, which means that he's given false information, inaccurate information. What does the club do then? Because that is, reputationally, that's damaging the club within Scottish football. Already has done with two clubs. The Scottish Government is taking aim at them. He's basically said that they moved the goalposts in relation to the amount of players that we need to isolate because of the distance, the social distancing, now the physical distancing. There's a suggestion that Celtic were to blame because of their own seating plan. So this is going to go back and forward. I don't think we've seen the end of it, Colin. Yeah, it would be brilliant to talk about the Livy game tonight and all that entails, but I don't think we've seen the end of it. But as a club, the bigger issue here is, as a club, how do they deal with it? Do they deal with Neil Lennon as part of this ongoing review, which is not yet concluded, but with every passing day you're wondering when it will be concluded? Is it taking so long because there's a standoff between Neil Lennon and the club? Neil Lennon's on a 12-month contract. Are the club looking for him to walk? Is Neil Lennon standing firm because he knows that if he is sacked, he gets a year's wages? Over £1 million, reportedly. So, Amy, what's your thoughts on that in relation to the aftermath, the fallout? Have we heard the end? When, if at all this season, can we get back to talking about football?
I think anytime you get close to talking about football, then something will just pop up again. If it be that the government then give a response, it was obviously John Swinney came out just earlier as well. So I think it's just going to keep hanging over us. I really do. Because I think if anything was going to signal the end of it, it would have been Lawwell's apology. I know I said that earlier. But like you say, Lennon, that's not Celtic's message. It clearly isn't, because it's contradictory. So it did just sound like he was, I'm not going to talk agendas or anything like that, but it was more like he was just talking on the basis of himself and protecting himself. Not everything that he said was wrong. There is issues there if what he's saying is true, but you can't completely commit to Lennon right now. You can't completely. We've not been given the whole picture. We're not, and I think that's the heart and bit as well. Like Lawwell's coming out, and then Lennon's coming out a few days later, but saying, "Oh yeah, but what about this, that, and whatever." So that's never really being given a clear picture. I don't think as well Lennon was in the best state. Like he sort of went rogue. Obviously, like you never talk to the media when you're so fired up, and it was clear that the emotions were running high. Nothing wrong with that as well. But was that the right place, right time? If he wanted to address his message, which he's more than entitled to do, was it the best place and the best time? Definitely not. So I don't think it's the end of it. I really don't. Until there is severe clarity, and I think it's going to take for somebody, either the government or the club or Lennon or anybody, to fully commit and say, right, yes, I'm wrong, they're right. We're wrong, they're right. There just doesn't seem to be like a full stop to it. Not in my eyes, anyway.
Now,
see, the question. Sorry, Paul. Just the question I would ask you, Amy. Right. So obviously you've worked. We spoke about it last week. You do the media stuff with Bonnyrigg. Now, if you were in that press conference and you were looking to ask the questions to Neil Lennon, how does that come across from that side, from the media side of things, when you see a manager reacting in the way that he reacts to the questions he's been asked?
It really is each to their own. I wouldn't get a kick out of that. Like some obviously would want to try and get like some media outlets. Sorry, they'll think, right, we'll get a headline out of this. This guy's rattled up a little bit. We can make the back page tomorrow. We can probably even make the front page tomorrow if we get him to say something. It's just like poking him with a stick, just trying to get something out of him. And I do think that's what they were doing. You could see that he was. There's obviously. every manager right now comes out and says, oh, they don't look at social media, they don't look at the papers, but that's not the case. It's impossible. Like, it is physically impossible. There is no way that Lennon is not aware that Eddie Howe's been tipped for the job and odds have been slashed. And then obviously I think he's now favourite for Newcastle job as well. But I think Bruce has got the back in there. It's all these things. He'll be aware that all this is going around him. And the media are obviously all aware of that as well. So it really does depend on the individual. Like you say, do I want to try and get a headline out of him, or do you just say, right, this is a really struggling guy here? Because that's what he is. He was a struggling man on Monday and he did look lost.
You know, when I look at the situation as a whole, what you've got there is you've got a message coming out from the CEO. You then have a message coming out from Neil Lennon, and they don't add up. I mean, it's not a consistent message. I mean, there's various inconsistencies between the two. Then you've got Callum McGregor coming out and saying that they didn't know how to manage a game of football against Livingston at home. So what you're looking at there, as I say, it's fragmented within. You've got the playing staff, you've got the management coaching staff, you've got the executive board level staff, and it's fragmented. So going back, and I'm going to have to go back to a time where I think many of us felt that the club were operated in a more professional manner. And we used to speak about the Holy Trinity, and when the Holy Trinity at Celtic all worked together and were in tandem, we were an unstoppable force, and it was proven. And that's why we went on that great run that it looks as though it's coming to an end. But that quote was from a certain Brendan Rodgers. Now, with hindsight, obviously, going through the tenure of Brendan, we've done it with a fine tooth comb. We were here when he left the club. We responded, we reacted. People are angry at him, they still are. I'm now looking at the situation and thinking to myself, he was within a club, not just Neil Lennon, because as I say, we've seen the fragmentation between the playing staff, coaching staff and the board level. He was in that club. And I don't think that he was impressed with that. Now, we can certainly highlight the certain transfers, Colin, that we've already spoken about. Castagna, Piccini, John McGinn. There's maybe others that we're unaware of that may have been the straw that broke the camel's back with that particular manager. But now we're looking at a situation where it's unravelling, and that's because, obviously, the conduct of the manager this week is night and day to the kind of conduct that I would expect from a Celtic manager. And indeed, we never really seen anything quite like that when Brendan Rodgers was in charge. Brendan Rodgers is now top of the EPL. We are probably an unassailable distance away from the top of the SPL. So when you're looking at that, SPFL, when you're looking at that situation and you think how far we've dropped since he left the club, that would then lend me to say, regardless of anything else, you know, the playing performance has been really, really woeful this season, but that professionalism has been lost at our club. I went as far to say we're a laughing stock. We became a laughing stock because Spartak Moscow thought we were a laughing stock on Twitter, which again was unprofessional on their part. I mean, tongue-in-cheek's great, bit of banter on Twitter between clubs is great. Under the circumstances, it was really just a dig in the ribs at that point. That's why I would say, and I'm going to ask you the question, Colin, you say you're going to wake up tomorrow, no matter what happens tonight, Neil Lennon will still be in charge. How long do we let this go? Because this is spiralling every single week. It's getting further and further down to the point where how far do we go before you make that change? I don't think we can leave it any longer. There was strong rumours maybe at the beginning of the week that this was Neil Lennon's last game in charge. You don't think that's going to happen, Colin?
No, I don't. What suggests that that's going to be the case? I mean, there's no evidence in the reaction from the board, from anybody above Neil Lennon to suggest that he won't be the manager come tomorrow morning. I've seen a lot of people talking about it, saying this will be a Mowbray moment, this will be a Mowbray moment. We've had about 5 or 6 of these Mowbray moments so far this season. I mean, getting knocked out of the League Cup by Ross County should have been a Mowbray moment. Drawn with St Johnstone, which was a terrible performance. The Dubai trip, getting knocked out of the Champions League by Ferencváros even as far back as the start of the season. There's been lots of these moments. Even if you want to go back to last season, we get taken to extra time by Dunfermline in the Betfred Cup, which was one of the worst performances I've ever seen at Celtic Park. I mean, there's been a lot of evidence there before to suggest that if you were any other club on the run that we're on, he wouldn't be the manager. But I don't see anything changing. And I suppose in a small extent, you've got to commend that loyalty. If you're a manager and you're getting that sort of loyalty from the people above you, despite how poorly you've been performing, that's incredible. I mean, if I was performing that badly in my job and someone that was above me was saying, "Don't worry, you'll still be all right," that's the kind of support you're looking for. But when we're in a results-based business here in football, and the results at Celtic haven't been anywhere near good enough this season, they've not been befitting of the previous 9 years. They've not been befitting of the stature that Celtic are. But yet, here we are. We could lose this game 2-3-0 tonight, and I believe that we'd wake up tomorrow morning and Neil Lennon would still be the manager.
So, that then begs the question, Colin, what would it take? Because we're out of the league, we're out of the Champions League, we're out of the Europa League, we're out of the League Cup, we're miles off. And not just that, all the other sagas that have gone on, ranging from Bolingoli to Dubai and everything in between. What would it take then? Because, I mean, what else could you possibly do wrong as a manager? You've lost everything. You've lost absolutely everything. What's holding the club back, do you think?
It's quite interesting. Like, you had the interview earlier on in the year with John Barnes, and he spoke about a sort of unconscious bias that was towards him. And I don't agree with everything that John Barnes said, but I do believe that if John Barnes was the manager of Celtic Football Club and he was performing the way that Neil Lennon's performing, he wouldn't be in a job. But I also think the same of that of Tony Mowbray. I think the same of Ronnie Dyler. There's a certain, I don't know if it's like a sort of emotional attachment to Neil Lennon amongst the boardroom at Celtic, that they still think that he can turn it around. I don't know if it's the fact that the fans aren't getting into the ground, so that you're not actually hearing the vocal support. Yes, there was the protests outside the stadium, but if 60,000 fans were at the game every week, I mean, I can't imagine what the atmosphere would have been like for that Livingston game the other day if we performed the way that we performed and made a full house. It'd be terrible.
I don't think there'd be a full house by this stage, to be honest with you.
Well, that's another point that you would bring up as well. But even listening to Scott Brown yesterday, Scott Brown came out and said that the players believe in everything that Neil Lennon said. I don't think Scott Brown's talking for the whole squad. There's absolutely no chance of that being the case. But when you've got a captain that's backing the manager, when you've got a boardroom that's backing the manager, how can you be in the position of making change?
And if he's saying that they believe everything that Neil Lennon said, then again, it's contradicting some of the content that Peter Lobel put out. I was asking a question, Amy, because, you know, really, quite frankly, what else could go wrong this season? And even if it did go wrong, would Neil Lennon still be in charge? Because there's a bigger issue here. The bigger issue being, of course, just around the corner is season ticket renewal time. And I made that point, Colin, because there's no way at this stage of the season, and it's all hypothetical, that if we were in this situation and we played Livingston last week, that you'd have 60,000 at Celtic Park. But we are coming round to the point where, you know, many Celtic fans are looking for this reaction that Colin quite rightly says we don't seem to be getting at the moment. What do you think's holding the board back from making any decisions at this stage?
I think it must be a question of, like, as Colin said, it's got to be something in the fact that it is the man that is Lennon. Because if it's Dyler, if it's Mowbray, if it's me or you, we're out. It is Lennon, and again, and there's a bit of that I understand, because of what he's done, these 20 years of affiliation with the club, and he has done a lot of good. Like, we cannot underestimate that. And I do, and I think I said that as well, maybe last week. I hope in time that this isn't what he is remembered for, his legacy, because he's done a hell of a lot of good at Celtic, for the club, player, manager, everything in between. So I think that is what's holding them back. I think as well, though, it's probably one of these ones that the board are just so disconnected with the fans. Like, they don't care what we think. Like, they really don't. Like, that is so evident. If they cared, Lennon would have been away by after the county game, not holding on to the sentimentality of the quadruple treble. There's so many things we could recite back to that. If the board cared, if the board reflected our opinion, that they would have acted before now. I don't know what else is hanging on. Unlike Colin, I think, like, first and foremost, I think now Lennon will be in the job tomorrow, because I don't think tonight will go ahead. But I do believe that if tonight went ahead, even if it was a win, lose or draw, I do I do think Lennon would be out the door tomorrow morning. I really do. I know Colin's saying, what's the evidence to back that? What's been the evidence to back anything this season, though? I don't think there needs to be evidence. Everything's just done spontaneously. I'm a little bit off the cuff. Do you think, like, trying to throw a curveball in? So, yeah, I do think tomorrow is, they would just think, yeah, it's probably just a regular Thursday morning. Let's just go for it now. I don't think there needs to be an evidence, but I don't think the game will go ahead tonight, and that's why I do think Lennon will still be in a job tomorrow now. It does change everything that would have been put in place on Monday morning this week.
The big thing I would say, again, a couple more points before we get to the comments coming through, but watching that interview was painful to watch for me. It was uncomfortable to watch. And that was because it was so emotive. It was so emotional coming from Neil Lennon. That there does also come a point, Colin, where you say, we've got to do what's right for all parties involved. So you might have a section of Celtic supporters saying that Neil Lennon has to go. And by the way, you even find yourself not saying sack him, because there is a loyalty, Colin, and there is a respect for what he has done and what he has gone through for the club. But, you don't say sack him. There's time for him to go. It's time for him to go. That's my view. It's the view of a lot of Celtic supporters. I know I don't speak for every Celtic fan. But then there comes a point where you say, what's right for the supporters, what's right for the club, and what's right for the individual? Do you think also, Colin, that needs to be something they have to consider once it gets to this kind of level where, Neil Lennon was really just having pot shots at all and sundry on a platform that we all know he's having a go at the media because, there's a narrative as far as Neil and others are concerned, but you're giving them the content to run with that narrative, Yeah. So you've got to be cuter than that. Now, he's got far more press experience than I'll ever have. Neil Lennon's given far more interviews than I'll ever give. But he has given ammunition there, so he needs to be better than that when he's performing as a manager at Celtic Football Club in a press conference. That would suggest to me that he isn't firing on all cylinders at this moment in time. He had 14 days, he had 2 weeks to prepare for that interview. And the first thing he did was demand an apology. No, that was the wrong start to that interview, if you get my opinion, if you're asking me for my view on it. So there comes a point where it's best for all parties concerned. Are we at that point? Is that maybe going to be the tipping point, Colin, for the Celtic board to say, right, for the best of everybody here, we're going to have to let you go?
And the thing is, as horrible as this season has been, nobody wants the worst for Neil Lennon. If you remember the trophies that he's won as both as a player and as a manager, everybody wants him to be remembered for that. But the fact that we've got into this sort of farcical situation does damage his reputation slightly. You saw what happened at Rangers when Ali McCoist became the manager. Now, one of the greatest ever strikers, and then was basically hounded out the door because of his performances as manager. So that's just the way football goes. And when I hear people say, bring in Henrik Larsson as the manager, I would hate that to be the case, because if that ended horribly, I can't fathom what it would be like to see people actually slating him, considering the legend that he was at the club. So it is a reputational risk that he takes. The thing about this with Neil Lennon is it's not the first time he's done it, and it's not the first club he's done it at. If you look at the stuff that he's done when he was down south as a Bolton manager, coming out and having these sort of scattergun interviews. He even did an interview as Hibs manager once where he accused Bobby Madden of being pro-Morton. I don't even know if Morton fans are pro-Morton. It would be quite a rarity to have a referee that was pro-Morton. So these things happen, and it's not the first time that Neil Lennon's done it. I think for his own good, if I was in his position, I'd be looking to step away. I can understand that he doesn't want to do it because he might not know where his next job's coming from. He knows he's got a wage coming in. He still believes that he can turn it around. Despite the contradiction in his interview the other day, when he said the league might be beyond us, but we'll never stop fighting, but we're still on for 10 in a row. It was a complete contradiction. But I honestly still think, and I've said this many times on this show, I still think Neil Lennon believes he's the best manager to take us forward. And I think that he's one of maybe very, very, very few people that also believe that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, the other thing I was going to ask, I'll come back to yourself, Amy, is an interesting story or non-story in relation to Well, it's on Edouard. I think people have joined the dots here because Real Madrid have got a French manager and they're talking about Eddie to Real Madrid. Do you think he will leave? I can't see it happening in January. And if he does, what kind of level are we looking at for someone like Edouard? He's not had the best season, we all know that. Although obviously he has performed pretty well for the under-21s France team. So what was your thoughts on that story? A bit of a non-story, do you think, Amy? Just paper talk?
I think it's paper talk. I'd like to think it's just paper talk. Real Madrid's a bigger shout than the other clubs that have been mentioned in recent times. I think that's a bit of a funny one. Again, like you said, French manager. Let's put the dots together. I don't think he'll go in January. Well, I certainly hope he won't go in January. He's running out of time if he does want to go. Law will definitely be loving this. No talk, like you say, we've barely mentioned transfers. God, that's his dream. So I don't see him going. I don't see a lot happening this January, to be honest. I do think that he'll obviously go in the summer to Real Madrid. I don't think so. I don't think yet. I think eventually. You just need to look at Dembele though. That's Dembele's obviously just signed on loan with Atletico Madrid. Is he even guaranteed a start right now? I don't know. He's going in. I think the Dembele one's also an odd move, going in with Suarez and João Felix there. I prefer Dembele to Edouard. I know some people would still prefer. They think Edouard's a more complete player. I personally disagree. I don't think he's going to jump right from Celtic to Real Madrid. I really don't. I think there'll be a smaller club, bigger than Celtic, smaller than Real Madrid. There'll be a middleman. And then if things go well there, then yeah, obviously sky's the limit and Real Madrid can go calling again. But I can see him going to Italy or I can see him going to France, something like that. But I don't see him jumping straight to Real Madrid. Not at this stage.
Interesting point.
Do you know what, Paul? Sorry, Paul. It feels like one of those things that you see on Twitter when it's like, pick the first letter of your first name and pick the last number of your phone number and it's your transfer rumour generator. And it's just pulled up Edouard to Real Madrid. I've actually heard that he's been more linked with moves down south. And the person who's actually quite reliable for West Ham transfers, who is apparently an ex-employee down there, and broke the news of Albion Ayeti's move to Celtic, has suggested that he's been linked with a move to West Ham, and I could see that happening. And I do think that this might be the time that Celtic decide to cash in on him.
Well, the Hammers certainly need a centre forward, don't they? So that certainly would make sense. And I agree with you, Amy. I think that would be a wiser kind of move. And I don't think West Ham are a bigger club than Celtic. They're playing in a bigger league. So I think you'll see that as a platform to maybe that next move. Absolutely. One last thing before we get into the comment section, because obviously we don't want to take the entire hour up by chatting. We need to throw this out to those who tune in. The Brendan Rodgers thing. Now, obviously, they beat Chelsea. That was the first time he's ever beaten Chelsea, Colin, right? Just, I'm going to ask your opinion on something, right? Chelsea, Frank Lampard, he's under pressure at the moment, isn't he? They've not won in something like 8 games, right? Now, that's going to be a managerial merry-go-round. It always is down in England, right? If he was to lose his job and they offered that job to Brendan Rodgers, whilst Brendan Rodgers is at the top of the league at Leicester, would he go? Would he go to Chelsea?
I mean, it would be a return for him. He was the assistant manager, I think, there under Jose Mourinho at one point. He was the reserves manager as well. So, is it a step up for him? It would be interesting. I think they generally do have a good chance of winning the league this season. I generally think that Leicester squad are capable of winning the league only because all these teams with the sort of world-class players, they're just not turning up. I mean, you take a look at Manchester United. 6 months ago, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was favourite to get the boot from that job. They brought in Bruno Fernandes, and from that point onwards, they seem to have went on this run. Liverpool, with all their star players, they're falling injured. Chelsea have spent like nearly 200 million this summer, and they've done absolutely nothing. City are only just starting to get some consistency back. You just couldn't write Leicester off winning the league. Now, I know he left Celtic with the chance of winning the Scottish League. Would he do it again if Leicester had the chance of winning the league? I don't think he would.
You don't? You don't? No. That was a long way around to give us the answer, Colin. I thought you were going to sit on the fence. Amy, do you think he would?
No, I'd prefer that Leicester squad instead of the Chelsea squad. I think Colin's spot on right now. You look at that Chelsea team, spent something like 212 million in the summer there. You've got big players. Massive wages, massive money moves, and they're not performing. Give me James Maddison any day of the week, and also give me James Maddison in a post-match interview any day of the week. So no, I think he's probably at the best possible club right now. They're playing great football, playing Chelsea off the park last night. That's as a complete a performance as you'll get. So no, I'd take Leicester any day over that Chelsea side.
All right. Well, let me just kind of like frame it differently then, Colin. Even if, and it's not unthinkable, but even if Leicester were to win the league, do you think he's capable of winning the Champions League with Leicester? Do you think he would be capable of winning the Champions League given the difference in budget if he was to go to a club like Chelsea?
Could he? Actually, first of all, I just want to say I hope nobody takes that clip of what Amy just said. Give me James Maddison any day of the week.
You know it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
But genuinely, he doesn't have the squad at Leicester, I think, to win the Champions League. I don't think that any English team are actually capable of winning the Champions League this season. I think if you take a look at the German sides like Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund, they are certainly far and above anything that's in the English league. Barcelona and Real Madrid really haven't turned up this season.
I don't mean this season. I don't mean this season. Being at a club that he could win the Champions League with, he could. For me, he couldn't do it with Leicester. He could do it with Chelsea
if he spends his money wisely. I mean, you've seen what he done at Liverpool. Some of the signings that he made when he was a Liverpool manager were absolutely atrocious. Guys like Mario Balotelli. I mean, that's not going to win you a Champions League. But you'd think that he's probably changed over the time, and the signings that he's made at Leicester are definitely an improvement. But I think with that extra budget, trying to bring in the right players, I don't know. There's a good squad there at Chelsea. They just need the right guidance to get them there.
What I think will be interesting, Colin, is if he does lose his job, Frank Lampard, I bet you Rodgers is the favourite to take over. Let's have a look at some of the comments coming in. IH Decorating, welcome back to the show. If you are, like IH Decorating, watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe for us, like the video, because you know what happens is there's plenty of people who don't like the video. And I'm not even sure they watch it. I'm not saying that, every single time the show is so good that nobody's going to give it the thumbs down. But, Colin, you know how it works in here with regards to comments and certain people who watch this who have no interest in Celtic whatsoever. Neil Lennon embarrassed himself and the club with his tantrum and finger pointing yesterday. A litany of excuses to mask his failures this season. Overseen the worst title defence in my lifetime. Now, this goes back to something you were saying, Colin, whereby you have a huge amount of people who totally agree with that, but then you're up against a wide section of the Celtic support who think that what Neil Lennon did in that press conference was right. It's about time someone stood up to the media. It's about time someone stood up to the Scottish Government. I think, someone even says to me, you need to read the transcript. Well, I seen the interview. I know what the content was. Now, then someone said, but the words are more important than the way they're delivered. But they're not, because in communication, I could say to you, I didn't say you stole the money, Colin, or I could say, I didn't say you stole the money, and the two things mean completely different. They've got different outcomes. So the way you deliver it, i.e. the way Neil Lennon delivered it, was wrong. And so you can't just look at the words in isolation. You've got to look at the interview and the way it was delivered, the confrontational manner in which it was delivered, which is unprofessional. So and I've made this clear, I agree with IH Decorating on this one, but you do have a lot of Celtic fans who, I believe, Colin, will always stand up for Neil Lennon no matter what happens.
I think when you take a look at the transcript, obviously, if you speak about how it was put across, if it was put across in a different manner, maybe we would be looking at this slightly differently. But for me, the kind of telling thing was that Neil Lennon came out on the defensive right away. He was asking Charles Pattison to ask Andy Walker a question, asking him who he represents, asking him why he's this beacon of the Celtic support, as he put it. And then I think it was also poor timing on Celtic's behalf to interrupt the press conference to let him know that there'd been another positive case. I don't think that helped things at all. If they only just got that information, tell him after the press conference. Don't come in and interrupt him and do something like that, because that's a terrible bit of news to be given to a manager that he's potentially going to lose a player for the next couple of games. There's no need to do that. let him do the press conference and discuss that afterwards. But when that happened, you could feel the change in the demeanour of Neil Lennon. It was at that point where the answers started to get really sarky. I mean, his response about the ongoing January review was really poor for me. The fact where he turned around and says, there's news in the press that you're going to stay on till the end of the season. He turns around and says, well, that's great for me, isn't it? That's not the way that you want a manager to behave, and that's childlike. It was completely unprofessional. Would it have been different if he didn't get given that bit of news? We'll never know. But it was a complete car crash from start to finish. The transcript does make it look better, but having watched it, having listened to it, it's just really poor, and it's not the kind of situation you want to find yourself in, considering how this season's went.
Right, Scotland, again, coming in on YouTube, Mrs. Jim Simonetti and Stevie from the Rock. Now, a wee update. Jim Simonetti obviously is hugely involved. In fact, he runs the Jimmy Johnson Academy and a charitable trust, and he is dedicating his time to those endeavours, and obviously we wish Jim all the best, and that's why you haven't seen Jim on the screen for a while. Stevie from St Roch's, I spoke to Stevie this morning, and Stevie is still our regular pundit on a Thursday, but obviously we can't travel at this time, and he's no great on the old technical side of things, he'll admit that himself, but Stevie will be back sooner rather than later. So hopefully we will see Stevie Mullen very, very soon. Now, Stephen Docherty, West Ham all over him. If, for example, like what Colin suggested, Amy, Edouard was to go to a team like West Ham, managed very effectively, it's got to be said, by Davy Moyes, how well would he do at that level, do you think? Do you think he could tear it up down there?
Tear it up's maybe not the expression I would use. Bet you West Ham would be laughing. We'll give you a Yeti, we'll take Edouard. I don't know if tear it up. I think at that level he'd have a good side. Mikel Antonio, I think he'd link up really well with him. I think that's the sort of player that needs a bit of physicality, a bit of pace. He definitely, come on, we know Edouard would do more than okay down there. West Ham, I can probably see that working. Yeah, like you say, I know earlier I said, go to a bigger club. Again, West Ham aren't a bigger club than Celtic, but it's the money. It's the money move, isn't it? There you go. It's definitely not Real Madrid. I'd like to see him go somewhere a little bit bigger than West Ham, purely so it does, because I just don't see that as a step up from Celtic. Obviously, financially it is, but I don't know. David Moyes is an attractive manager probably right now. He's doing, like you say, he's tactical genius down there. So if that's what he fancies, then on he goes.
The big thing again, Amy, I'd see an opportunity there in what you said, because I totally agree. I think the way Moyes is operating down at West Ham's very, very impressive. It seems as though he is building something similar to he has before. I mean, there was a period of time he leaves Everton, he goes to Man United, then it was various jobs before. He seems to be settled now at West Ham. But what I would say is, if we were to have gone for him when he went to West Ham, loads of Celtic fans would have been kind of underwhelmed by that appointment, wouldn't they, Colin? I mean, it's all about perceptions. Would he have done a good job? Who knows? But look at the job he's doing down there. Look at the job he's doing down there.
He's done a fantastic job down there, and West Ham are one of those sort of quiet giants of the game down in England. They're a team that have had success in the past, and for a long time they've sort of been yo-yoing between the Premiership and the Championship. And especially, I think they've just sold their striker, Sebastian Haller, to Ajax for £25 million or £21 million. So I think Edouard coming in would be a good replacement for him. It would be absolutely devastating to see him go, especially the way this season's went. And it would just be another example of the way that we've kind of went about our business. But he would probably be a good fit for them down there. And any of the Hammers fans that watch the show will probably agree.
25 million, would you be happy with that, Colin, if indeed he does go?
I mean, it's obviously a good investment back on the 9 million outlay. There's a lot of discussion over what PSG will get as a sell-on. But you're at the fact where I don't think he'll sign a new contract. If you let him go, the longer you let him go, the less money you're going to get back for him. If that's the kind of money you're going to get, then that's what you're looking for. And Yeah, he probably would be happy with that with 18 months left on his deal.
Now, Hasboy 1888, what's going on in the world? Messi red carded, Lenny losing his rag. What next? Lowell on Axom. Yeah, well, actually, everybody will know that we made an offer. We tried to get Peter Lowell in. There was a financial incentive whereby the money would go to charity. We were promised an update in January. But again, there seems to be a thread developing because we are waiting on a few updates this January. So, yeah, I think Peter Lowell's probably got a few other things to deal with before he gets back to us. But we are continually chasing that interview because we were given some positives when we requested it from the club. We've gone through the correct channels. We've gone through the PR channels, Colin. So let's see what happens there. But, there are a few others in the mix. A Celtic State of Mind, actually started up as an interview-based podcast. We did, I think it was an interview a week, and we interviewed loads of interesting people, including the aforementioned John Barnes, which was quite a good interview. I've still got the visuals for that, actually. I never ever released them. Maybe I should dig them out. I've got Barnes, obviously the call that was made at that time. So, yeah, there are others in the pipeline for a Celtic State of Mind interviews that we'll bring to you, and we'll put them out beyond the bulletin. So it's no really a debate as such or the topical items on Celtic's agenda. It's more a look back on certain careers of those with a Celtic State of Mind. So yeah, we will be doing that as the season progresses, and perhaps we'll have a few during the pre-season as well. Now, what I would advise is that you're watching this on Periscope, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. If you are, then give us a follow. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Like the video for us. We're trying to build this channel up so that we can provide even more free content. It's always a pleasure to discuss Celtic with our great team of pundits. So all that's left for me to say is thank you, Amy Canavan and Colin Watt, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.